Hey, I'm Shaye Wanner, and you are listening to the Casual Cattle Conversations podcast. Whether you are a seasoned rancher or just curious about the cattle world, this podcast dives into the stories, science, and strategies shaping the future of ranching. Let's get started and keep your herd ahead of the herd. Folks, today we are visiting with Elaine Froese. If you are a long-time listener, you know that Elaine has been on the show several times before and has even done some live social media podcasts with me as well, but the topic we are discussing is new to the show, and that is non-family transition plans. And so Elaine is going to offer insight into whether if you are the next generation or that rising generation, and maybe a different operation is going to be a better opportunity for you, how to go about that. She also offers insight if you are the senior generation and don't have a family member to take over, or the family members involved aren't the best fit, how you can go about finding someone else who is. So it's very practical, very insightful. Regardless of which side of the equation you're on, you are sure to find value in this conversation. But with that, let's visit with Elaine. Well, Elaine, it's a pleasure as always to have you on the podcast. So thank you for joining me again today.
Great to be here.
All right. Well, today we are going to be talking about farm transitions, of course, because that is in your wheelhouse, absolutely, but specifically farm transitions to non-family members. Now, before we dive into that topic, help listeners get to know a little bit about you by sharing why you believe in the beef industry.
Why I believe in the beef industry is because I grew up as a beef farm kid. So my mom used to do promotions with the Beef Information Center in Winnipeg. I grew up on a beef mixed farm, Shaye, just outside of Winnipeg, Canada. I haven't been in the beef industry personally for a long time because in 1981, over 40 some years ago, I married a seed grower. So I've been in the grain industry for a long time. But I work with a lot of cattle producers in the coaching realm, and also especially my business partner, Lydia Carpenter, who has a direct farm marketing beef business with her husband and a non-related partner. And that's why we're having this discussion today.
Well, awesome. Now, Elaine, I think first and foremost, as we're talking about this conversation, in your eyes and in your experience, why is it so important for farmers and ranchers to maybe consider non-family members as a part of their transition plan strategy?
So one of the phrases that we use in our coaching practice, Shaye, is called "Where is it written?" And that comes from the book actually on emotional blackmail by Susan Forward. And the phrase "Where is it written?" I'll just practice with you. Where is it written that you, as a very skilled young rancher or farmer, cannot be in business with someone who is not family? And I really want people to sit with that. Who told you that you couldn't do this? Because why it's an important option, Shaye, is we do have family dynamics where there's a lot of unwritten expectations, there's a lot of assumptions, there's a lot of tension. And I'm working with a family right now, actually, in Saskatchewan, where I asked them very point blank in our discovery call last week, why are you still there? And so if someone is hearing my voice right now and hearing me say, why are you still there? And it kind of hits a nerve. That's just an opportunity point, because we say coaching is about recovery, but coaching is about discovery. So if you are in a farm or ranch situation right now with your family where you have no signed agreements, you've been there 11 years, they promised you all kinds of things when you came back from college or ranching for profit or wherever you've been off getting new learning to happen, and nothing has changed, and you tend to be in what we call this neutral zone, the pain of not knowing, then I want you just to stop and pause and say, what are my options? And you have options, Shaye, and I think that's the key point of our time together today, is for the voices and listeners listening to this today, that you know that if you're in a farm and ranch business arrangement that's not working, and the people that have all the power in terms of control of the assets, possibly the founders or the grandparents, and you have no power to get things written down and get agreements that help you build equity, then you have other options.
Wow, I think that question, where is it written? You bring that up every time we have a conversation, but it is so powerful for everyone to ask themselves in a lot of these situations.
Right, and it's a way to challenge assumptions. So how do you move forward for that? So Lydia is a perfect example. She's my business partner. She's my successor at Farm Family Coach. And she's doing two things. So she's running a direct farm marketing business with her husband, but she's also in a non-related partnership with a Scottish immigrant farmer, and I'll call him, his first name is Ian. And Ian treats Lydia and her husband and son as if they were family. So isn't that an amazing thing? And I'm standing in front of you here speaking as an adoptive mom. So my son, I did not give birth to. We adopted him when he was 2 days old, and we had an open adoption with his birth mother. And he is 37, now a father, a husband, and our successor on our farm. And so, again, I just want to challenge, there's a lot of culture in agriculture that's not healthy right now, Shaye, and one of them is protecting the bloodline. Unless you're family, you can't be in this business. Well, that's not true in 2025. And we see farming and ranching as a business. And some of your listeners see it as a lifestyle, and that's fair. But if that's the framework and the picture that they're telling themselves, then if you're on a ranch that's a lifestyle, good for you. But I suspect you're not profitable. And because you're not profitable, you're not opening up the opportunity for the next generation to get equity. But you're not being honest, are you? Because you're too humiliated to tell the next generation, there's not even enough money for me to live well in my 60s, 70s, 80s, let alone try and bring somebody else in. And these are the conversations, Shaye, that are keeping ag stuck, because you're not even having a conversation that's transparent and honest.
Absolutely. Now, Elaine, I am going to back up a little bit, because when I first asked the question about why is it important for farmers and ranchers to consider non-family transitions or plans to non-family members, you really focused a lot on the rising generation, that younger generation who might be stuck in a poor situation or could maybe go find another opportunity. But do you want to speak a little bit more to maybe that senior generation and, whether they don't have kids or if their kids aren't a fit?
Well, and again, we'll use Lydia as example. Ian, their joint venture partner, does have a daughter, but she has no interest in the farm. And so there is no successor through the family. And I've also had situations, Shaye, where people have left and gone into a joint venture with bachelor farmers that don't have spouses, farmers that don't have any successors at all. So every situation is unique. But if you Googled non-related farm transition, there'd be some interesting articles. And the one that I remember very poignantly was a young man who lived in a small town in Saskatchewan, and across the gravel road was a dairy farm. So when he was 15, he started walking across the road to help out with the dairy. And wouldn't you know that dairy family got to see his skill level, his commitment, and all the other good things he was bringing to the farm, and they became business partners. So you're right, it could be the founders, the couple, or a bachelor or a single person who doesn't have a successor. And one time I was speaking in Bigger, Saskatchewan, and I'm wearing an orange shirt today because it's Orange Shirt Day tomorrow for our Truth and Reconciliation Day, and I'm going on a walk with my grandkids later today. But I just, and this was before orange shirts were a thing, but this is maybe 15 years ago, and I said to the people in my audience, would everyone who doesn't have a successor please raise their hand? And Shaye, about 13 people raised their hand. And I said, well, would you all get a bright colored t-shirt next time so that when we come to these meetings, we can come and have conversations with you and know that you don't have a successor? And so that's also part of the folks listening to this who are leasing, say, pasture land or leasing some kind of cropland. Maybe you have a neighbor that you suspect is starting to want to step away without stepping totally back. Have you started sitting on the tailgate of their pickup with them and just saying, I'm just curious, Charlie, what are your plans for the future? Because I really like working with you, and I'm curious if we could make this a more formalized agreement. And just start planting the seeds now. And another way to do that would be to write a letter with what your business plan would be and what you would like to do. For Lydia and Vion and Ian, they have Ling cattle. So they have a Scottish breed of cattle that they use. and they have direct farm marketing where they do their meat cutting and whatnot, and have two audiences and customers in two parts of the province that they service regularly. But they have an ongoing conversation all the time.
You kind of answered the question before I even asked it, because you said, if you are already leasing or have those neighbors where that opportunity might be, go sit down and have that conversation, write them a letter, do that. Do you think it's important for the rising generation to consider location? Do they want to stick around to be close to family, or maybe should they be looking for opportunities in other parts of the state or country, or maybe even in another country?
That's a really powerful question. And again, in Lydia's case, her husband is from South Africa. Lydia's parents live 3 hours away. Ian, when he first immigrated to Canada, was in Alberta and didn't find what he was looking for there, so he moved to Manitoba. And so again, what is it that you truly want, Shaye? And I guess that's a good question for our listeners as well today. Do you want to have the best opportunity you can with business, with the equity that you can bring to the table? Because again, when you're in a non-related venture, what are you bringing to that relationship? And there also has to be a culture of helping one another, because obviously young farmers and ranchers today cannot pay full market value for assets, particularly land, right? And cattle markets, we know, are really hot right now at the top of the cycle, and getting into expanding a herd right now is a real financial challenge. So all of these economic indicators, you're going to have to weigh what is more important to me, getting started in a business where I'm in a relationship that I can really grow it, or do I just draw a circle around where I am, and this is as far out as I'm willing to go, to be however distant you want to be from your family of origin.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to touch on that the rising generation should consider or bring up if they want to start these conversations?
Another thing that we really focus on, Shaye, is your ability to know your numbers and have financial literacy and transparency. So we have a membership site which does group coaching 3 times a month. Just recently, Lydia was sharing how they share the cattle herd. So the cattle, of course, are all tagged and identifiable. And when they go to market, there's a spreadsheet that shows which ones were marketed. But there's also a back and forth financial transparency and fluidity around invoicing and who's paying for what. And it doesn't have to be that complicated, but I think what the people listening to their example is that you have to be able to trust one another, right? And have the good of the other person in mind, which is part of the culture, what you believe to be true. So in a non-related venture, you need to share the same values of hard work, good conflict resolution, and good conflict behavior, and also coming from curiosity without judgment. And so when you are showing the numbers to each other and making plans, or if something's keeping you awake at night with how the partnership is or isn't working, you wake up the next morning and you just say, hey, you know what? Last night I was losing sleep over the way that we're doing invoicing. I'm not really sure that we've covered all the bases. And in Lydia's case, their family, she's the one who does all the invoicing. So all the information funnels to her, and she's the landing point for that. And then her husband and their joint partner use their cattle skills and agronomy, and whenever they're doing their grazing rotations and all those other good things. So your question is, what does the next gen need to focus on? I want the next gen to understand how farm finances work and also get more financial literacy, and just put yourself into online courses or go to Ranching for Profit and learn how to find out, to know your numbers and what those numbers mean, and to be able to talk about them.
That is a big conversation that I've had with folks from Ranching for Profit or the Noble Research Institute, and on a lot of different podcasts and in my Rancher Mind discussions, so thank you for bringing that up. Now, Elaine, in your responses, I also sense the importance of understanding what your own skill set is, as well as your gaps. Do you want to speak to that?
Well, many people in coaching, Shaye, would tell you to build on your strength. I think it's really important to focus on what your skills and your strengths are. I'm not a detail person. We actually have a coaching assessment we use from CR leader group called the personal style assessment. So my strength is being able to deal with people and get things done, but I'm very poor at attention to detail. And so I will never be the accountant or bookkeeper in this operation and never have been. So that's just an example of knowing what your skill set is, and you can hire out for some of that. So as I mentioned, Lydia takes care in their venture, she takes care of a lot of the invoicing and whatnot and has the relationship with the accountant. But she's not the one who's always out there doing a lot of the physical work, because she also is part of the revenue generating stream doing the coaching practice, because that's non-farm revenue as well, right? So I think there's a lot of tired next gens out there, Shaye, who are trying to do everything, and they've been told in their culture, you just have to work harder. And we've all heard the saying, don't work harder, work smarter. And so that's why I think it's good for you to sit down as a group with your non-related partners and think about what are our strengths, what do you love to do, where you're losing all track of time, because in coaching, that's called being in flow. And right now, what we're doing, speaking with each other, and if I'm speaking to an audience or if I'm writing, that's where I'm losing all track of time, because that's what I'm wired to do. So my question for the audience is, what is it you're doing where you lose all track of time? In a good way? That's your passion. That's where you're in flow. What do you absolutely avoid doing, and why is there a pile of invoices on your desk that haven't been dealt with? Well, that's because you're not a books person. You're not wanting to pay attention to detail, and somebody else needs to be hired out to do that, or you need to find someone else on your team who's really skilled at that. And it's not wrong. So here's the saying, different is not wrong. It's just different. So understand how you are wired and how that makes you an integral part of the team.
And I think I would also add on to that, and you can tell me if you think differently, but, not only respect how you are wired, respect how others are wired.
Yes, absolutely. Put yourself in the other person's shoes. And for older farmers and ranchers listening to this, Shaye, I want you to start framing your future as stepping back without stepping away. So even if you're 70 or 80, whatever your age, late 60s like I am, you have meaning and you have purpose and value, but you have to find out what your role is going to shift like as you go forward.
All right. Now, Elaine, I want to shift the conversation back to that senior generation. How can they maybe start the conversation with a neighbor or someone else they see in the community, or know from other avenues that, there's potential for an opportunity?
So we have this thing in coaching called getting ready, Shaye. It's part of the cycle of renewal that I learned way back in 2003 when I trained as a Hudson Institute coach. And getting ready means exploring, networking, and training and learning. So if you're the older person looking at who's in your neighborhood, you can give them an opportunity and use it as a test run. So what if you rent them out, say 80 acres or something, or you have a hay field that needs to be cared for, or you want them to do corn silage, or whatever your operation entails. Why don't you invite them to work with you? And so first of all, you can test it out to see if it's a good working relationship. And then as you're working together, you can start exploring if your values are aligned. What do you think about changing our rotations? What do you think about using some new varieties? What do you think about whatever kind of expansion of the opportunity you want to give? Now, young people are very highly valued, Shaye, for their young backs and their energy, right? And their commitment. But they also don't know what they don't know, and that's where the older generation, I like to frame them as wise elders. So you want to have a young person or a younger generation working with you that respects your wisdom but asks lots of questions, and you don't mind answering those questions, but it works the other way, because you need to ask questions as to the younger generation, because the pressure now, Shaye, is also showing up for family. See, a bachelor doesn't have a spouse and children to look after, right? That's a whole other dynamic of time and priority that the younger generation needs to manage. And they don't want to have to be working all the time because that's to the detriment of what the family needs. So we call this a polarity. So a polarity is an issue that will never go away, but just needs to be managed. So for an older farmer, his polarity might be, well, I'll work all the time because I don't have any family to take care of. And he becomes a bit of a workaholic, which is not helpful when he expects the same kind of time commitment from the younger person who he's working with. Do you see what's happening? There's a values misalignment here because different is not wrong. It's just different. So again, the ability to put yourself in the older person's shoes or the younger person's shoes, the ability to reach out and say, hey, I noticed that you did this differently. Can you tell me more? Those are both positive conflict behaviors. And another one would be, I am so glad you showed up to help me with this project. I'm wondering if you'd like to commit to more projects, and let's make it a bit more formalized. Let's have an operating agreement. And that's how you start working towards getting those agreements in place so that everybody has certainty for their future, Shaye. Because what happens if that older farmer has a heart attack someday and there's nothing written down? That's when his long-lost nephews show up and say, hey, I hear there's land for sale here. And there is never anything written down for that younger farmer who's given this older guy 5 years of his best energy because they never stopped to write anything down.
Or I even think about that. I know a couple people I'm close to, they had contract for deeds in the process, but the individuals died before they signed the papers. Want to boost your herd's profitability? Choose Red Angus, the beef industry's most favored female. Registrations are up 24% over the past decade thanks to their docile temperaments, adaptability, and premium carcass quality. The Red Angus Association of America has rebranded its feeder calf program as Angus Access and partnered with Breeder, giving commercial cattlemen cutting-edge digital tools that make it easier than ever to capture premiums. Elevate your operation with Red Angus. And after this podcast, tune in to Red Angus Remarks.
So with agreements, what I want you to remember is don't try to save money by avoiding using a lawyer or someone who has the legal expertise to have an agreement that will be binding. And I think that's false economy, Shaye, when people say, oh, we'll just do this ourselves and sign it here. It doesn't cost a lot of money, and it'll be far more efficient when it needs to stand that you get it done properly.
So, Elaine, while we were on the conversations of agreements, you said make sure it's a good agreement. What are the basics of a good agreement?
Well, we have a unanimous shareholders agreement in our coaching practice, Lydia and I, because Lydia is my successor, and I, as I said earlier, am approaching 70. A good agreement is understood by both parties, and it covers all the contingency plans. And so we have a unanimous shareholders agreement template that our lawyer gave us that we have permission to share. But I think if people just want to have open conversations and then have an objective third party ask them the what if you get injured? What if you lose your mental cognitive capacity? What if we have financial struggles? How much can we spend without asking the other person for permission to spend more than $5,000 or whatever those look like? And again, Shaye, it's just so important that is talked through and signed, because we've had some coaching issues lately where a more formalized structure of business, say a corporation, was put in place, but the accountant never helped them develop a shareholders agreement. And that's like waiting for a bomb to go off, because what if your situation changes and you decide you no longer want to be a beef producer anymore and you decide to go off and do something else, but there's no buyout agreement, right? There's no exit strategy. So there's different types of agreement. I think you would want to start with an operating agreement, which is what we had with our parents when we first came back to the farm. which was very clear about how the income was split. And money causes a lot of issues, as you know, if you're not able to talk openly and honestly about money. So that would be one thing. And then that works its way into a partnership agreement. And then typically a partnership agreement, once it becomes more formalized, works its way into a more corporate kind of agreement. So there's different levels, but you need to start.
Okay. So, Elaine, in our conversation today, you've touched on agreements, expectations, and of course, understanding what you really want, whether you are whichever generation you belong to, right? What other considerations in non-family transition plans either need to be considered or you see as often forgotten?
Don't leave the other spouse out of the equation of the conversation, Shaye. And again, I'm using Lydia's template as an example. Ian's wife is very supportive of the arrangement of having a non-farm party. Lydia and her husband have a son who's only 7, or I think he's approaching 8 years old soon, but he's young and he may be next generation, but they don't put pressure on themselves for that. They deal with the current reality. And so again, communication, I think you've all heard Brené Brown say, being clear is kind. So the more conversations you can have with all of the family that is impacted by this non-related joint venture, then I think that just opens up the pathway for success, because there's no assumptions. You want to open up that pathway to not have assumptions, Shaye. That's just so important. And again, you want to create a culture where everybody's excited to celebrate the wins. So even though you're not family, you're excited that the cattle have had a great birthing experience, or you're excited that the rotations are working, and you're excited that the changes you've made in the feed rations have given you more success, or you're excited that you've got another business opportunity. And I think people want to see neighbors do well together, Shaye, because we have way too many sad stories of people protecting what they have and not opening up themselves to other possibility. So there is an actual book by Benjamin Zander called The Art of Possibility. And one of the principles is lead from the bench, which means if I'm sitting on the bench playing a piano, or on the bench being a coach, I'm coaching the other people around me to do well too, and it's not just for yourself. And I think agriculture has some real mindset shifts, because some people say, oh, my neighbors will never help me out, because that would never happen in my neighborhood, because everybody's just out there for themselves. And I go, oh, well, then you haven't met my neighborhood. Because in our neighborhood, 3 families went together as a joint venture for a land proposal, and they got it. And that meant that every farm grew by 2/4 of land, not just one farmer getting all of it. And again, where is that written that you can't work and collaborate together for the good of all the families?
Absolutely. Now, Elaine, one thing we didn't touch on when we were early on, when I asked you about, how can the senior generation bring up these conversations? How can the senior generation maybe approach their kids if they do have kids that are interested but aren't the right fit, and let them know that, I have someone else who I'd prefer to be involved in this transition plan, which sounds harsh, but I mean, it's a conversation I've had with Dave Speck too, where sometimes your own kids are not the right people.
That's right. And that's when you have the skills assessment and you have job descriptions. So if anyone wants Dick Whitman's 7 pages of job descriptions, just reach out to me and ask for them. Because those job descriptions help people get really clear about what's expected of them. And unfortunately, in the conversation you're alluding to, sometimes your own kids are not the right fit because they don't have the right attitude, work ethic, skills, whatever. Maybe they have a spouse who doesn't want them to be a beef producer, right? There's all different kinds of things that can be happening for that person. So again, I'm giving you hard news. We don't want you to be part of this farm business, but that doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity for you in a different place. We're letting you go. I also, while you were asking me that question, Shaye, in my head was thinking, get me to a coach. like get somebody seriously from like what we do in facilitation to help you have that conversation, to get you prepared for why you want what you want, to get your son or daughter to prepared to be able to accept hard news. And then the facilitator coach holds you both in the same space. And this has just happened to us. And I won't tell you which sector it is because it's confidential, but I'll just tell you that we were hired by the father to say, Elaine, I have all these successors, but I have to know if I'm going to make some big business moves, who's committed and who's not. And wouldn't you know, the key person was no longer committed. They wanted to do a totally different career path. And so you have two choices: to be angry and upset that the dynamic is changing, or the other choice, which this family said, great, now we know exactly where everybody's at. We can celebrate the fact that you need something different for your own heart and passion and for your own family with small children. And it was the meeting, when we went around at the end of the meeting, they said, oh, Elaine, I was really anxious about this meeting. It went way better than expected. And I said, well, I would say it went way better than expected because each of you was prepared by the coach to ask and be really clear about what you needed so that when you came to the meeting, it wasn't a surprise because everybody was prepared to accept what the answer was of the other family member. So that's setting up a different dynamic, Shaye is saying. And then the other problem, of course, for this family is that the neighbors are going to have an opinion. Oh, I heard your kid's not going to be taking over the ranch. What's with that? Well, my son or my daughter has chosen to go a different path, and with our blessing, because we are more concerned about being rich in relationship than we are about doing what other people expect of us. This is what's best for our family.
Absolutely. Now, Elaine, before we wrap up our conversation today, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave the listeners with?
I just had a conversation, Shaye, with Maggie Van Camp, who's a dear friend of mine and a farmer from Blackstock, Ontario, who's also done a lot of work in the financial space in ag leadership. And one of the trends that she's seeing is people wanting to exit totally from farming and not knowing how. So the founding generation doesn't know that they need a plan to also exit. And then, of course, the other thing that's hard is because land values and cattle prices are so high, the financial stress and the debt servicing issue is a thing, right? And some people have, I just heard a comment, I can't remember where it came from. I think it was from a discovery call person reaching out to me for a discovery call saying, Elaine, this is starting to feel even harder than the 80s. And many of you, Shaye, weren't even born then. So you've heard all the stories about how hard it was in the 80s, right? So what I'd like people to think about is, how can you create certainty for yourself through good agreements? And secondly, how can you be clear about your expectations? And then once you have that clarity, you can create certainty. Then you're no longer in the pain of not knowing and you're not in the neutral zone. And I had a woman come up to me after a family meeting that we did with a very large family. And she said, Lane, thank you for helping us get clarity because now I feel like about 50 pounds are off my shoulders. So as an older person, you might be just sitting and stewing and dwelling and drilling down that this is not going to work. I don't have any options. I don't know what to do. I'll just keep working harder. I would really challenge you to say no. Reach out. Tell people that you're having difficulty letting go. And a lot of older ranchers, Shaye, are not going to let go of their ownership because they're afraid of loss of identity. They're afraid of failure, actually a loss of the assets of the ranch. There's lots of things they're afraid of. So start asking more kind, compassionate questions and saying, you don't look like you're doing very well right now. What's keeping you awake at night? Would you like to talk about it? Or would you like to have someone help us talk about it so that we can start looking at attacking the issue of what needs to let go and how can we move forward? Because people do not let go of property roles, horses, cows, anything, Shaye, unless they have something better or more rewarding or exciting for the stage they're at to move toward. And, you know, I don't know how many ranchers are really looking at what the next 5 years, what they want their life to look like. Because usually when I ask a rancher, Charlie, what do you really want? His first response is, I don't know, Elaine. I just gotta go to the cows. And that's the self-awareness piece, Shaye, I think is really important to start. And also planting the idea, what would it look like if I didn't work on weekends? Or what would it look like if I took 3 months off in the winter to leave the ranch? Would you want to manage it? Like just putting things out there and start playing with possibility and what the emotions could be.
All right. Well, Elaine, as always, I appreciate your perspective and willingness to share your experiences and thoughts with the listeners out there. I will be sure to link your website in the show notes. Is there anywhere else you'd prefer listeners go to get in contact with you if they want to reach out?
I love people actually calling me. People say, oh, you actually answered the phone. Yes, that's what I think phones are for. So my text number is 204-534-7466. But another great way to reach out is actually just to go to the website at farmfamilycoach.com, fill in the contact sheet, and we're happy to do a free discovery call with any rancher listening to this, Shaye. And also in early October, our membership card is open because group coaching is also a way that we can make a larger impact. And in our website, you just have to hit the membership tab to learn more about that. So thanks so much for inviting me back. And shout out to all those ranchers out there and cattle producers. You work long hours, you love your livestock, and you want a good return for your energy. But please also take really good care of yourself because it's your farm, it's your family, and it's your choice. And hopefully as a coach, we've given you some ideas to make good choices to get the life you've always wanted and to have harmony through understanding. So thanks for your time today, Shaye.
Absolutely. Well, folks, you can find all that information in the description as well, along with any other resources that may have been mentioned throughout the show. Now, remember, the best way to support this podcast and all your other favorite podcasts is to leave a rating or review, and better yet, share it with a friend who's going to find this valuable, because podcasts grow best by word of mouth. But with that, happy ranching, folks.